Hey everyone, welcome to episode 43 of the Ceres podcast. In this episode, we talk to Afroditi Krassa from the design studio of the same name. Aphrodite has worked with some great people on amazing projects, so it's pretty fascinating to hear her journey. We do have some cultural similarities, me being from a Cypriot background and Aphrodite being from Greece, so we actually start off the episode discussing how to say her name, hence why the episode starts a bit like that. For many, they wouldn't consider this podcast about hospitality. There is no doubt in my mind that it is. Design is so important, especially if you want to get any form of hospitality right. For those of you that are new to the Ceres podcast and don't know who pays the bills, then head over to worldofceres.com. We've been updating our newsfeed recently, and we've posted a full roundup of the awards, articles that will help you in National Fish and Chip Day, a spotlight article with Charlie Collins, this year's Dry White Young Fish Fryer, a spotlight article with James Lant from the English Indian, who recently won Best Mobile Fish and Chip Award, and our new Question Time with Someone features. And this month, the first two we've put out, Sophie Capel from Chez Fred and Gordon Hilton from KFE, and there should be a weekly feature, all being well. Anyhow, you didn't tune in to hear me waffle on. Aphrodite is an absolute perfectionist, and the way she discusses design puts me at ease to understand it. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Aphrodite as much as I did. Enjoy. I'm going to say in Greek, Afroditi, thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
And for those that don't know you, you're Afroditi Krassa from...
Perfect accent.
Oh, yes, not as good as yours. From Afroditi Krassa Design Agency. Is that design agency?
Yeah, design studio.
So, and again, for those that don't know, I think it's good to just give people a little bit of a background of what you do.
Sure.
And you're a design agency. You were established in 2002, born in London, raised in Greece, and then came back. You were the first female designer at Simon Powell Agency, one of the largest studios in Europe, and you've worked with notable names like Pret a Manger, Itsu, Dishoom, Café Rouge, Curzon Cinema, Suvlaki, Gordon Ramsay. I always say the Greek words in Greek. I can't help it.
Great.
Gordon Ramsay Group and Rosewood Hotel Group. I'm sure that's not the list, all of the list, but it's just a few notable names.
Yes, sure.
So thank you for today.
Pleasure.
I know how
Thank you
busy
for
you are.
inviting me.
No, well, how could I not? So what we do at the Ceres podcast is essentially we want to be talking to anybody that makes hospitality happen. Mm-hmm. And I think this is right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. You know, you were there before the cooking equipment goes in, before everything. And what I really want to get out of this is how important your role is. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about how does someone decide, like yourself, how do you get into this?
I knew I wanted to be a designer since I was a teenager, I guess. And I knew I wanted to be involved in a creative profession. So I was torn between architecture, design, graphic design versus product design versus interior design. So I knew I would end up somewhere across these disciplines. And I went on to study product design eventually at Central St. Martin's College of Art, and then I did my master's at the Royal College of Art in furniture design. And I really enjoyed that sector, I loved it, and I set up my studio quite young, thinking that I'll be focusing in designing furniture pieces. And 2 or 3 years down the line, I met almost by accident with Julian Metcalf, the founder of Pret a Manger. And he was at the time thinking of setting up a new chain, which eventually became Itsu. Uh-huh. And he invited me to join him and join forces in leading the creative around this brand and leading the design and becoming the creative director of the brand, of this newborn brand. And I have to say, it wasn't a sector I had worked in before, the hospitality sector, or food and beverage in general. It was not I didn't have any experience. I did explain to him that I have no experience in that area, but he was very keen to get me involved. So he invited me, gave me this great opportunity. So my involvement in the food and beverage sector and the wider hospitality was almost accidental through that meeting with Julian Metcalf, which changed the course of my career because I absolutely fell in love with that world. I fell in love with how dynamic the world of food and beverage is, with how quickly it moves, how quickly it changes, and also fell in love with the people behind the hospitality world, because to me, the hospitality world is full of very, very passionate, creative human beings who want to do things in a very creative way. And it's also very anthropocentric as a sector, so it's a lot about understanding human emotions, service, making people feel great, looking after people. And this really resonated with my Greek roots and my passion for food. So I thought this sector is perfect. It combines my love for design with my love for people and food and having a good time. So since I started on that project with Julian, I never looked back, and I thought this is the perfect sector for myself.
So what were the biggest challenges in the early days? You started the company, looking back, what was the biggest challenge for you?
I think the biggest challenge was that I had very little experience in running a business and actually very little experience in design as a whole. I was very naive in thinking, I've worked 3 years in a design agency, I've got 2 degrees, therefore I know what I'm doing. And you don't, but when you're young, you think, I know everything. And I was 27 when I set up my business, which looking back now is very, very young. And I remember I graduated from college, I got a scooter, I got a laptop, and I got a little kind of really basic studio down in Battersea, almost like a garage kind of environment scenario, which would be £80 a month. And I thought, there I am. I've got a business. Now I can go out and design stuff. But suddenly it became very apparent that I had no experience in how to run a business. I had no support. I had no clients. I had no money coming in. And I knew very little. And I had to learn on the job. And was it challenging? Yes, it was very challenging. Was it fun? Yes. But on hindsight, which is a very useful but useless term, because everything on hindsight is different, but you don't have the hindsight when you start something, I should have waited a bit longer and probably gathered more experience and knowledge before I set up my business. But I think I'm impatient as a character, and that's why I did it.
So I suppose I know what it's like to open a business or start a business at 27. So, I was roughly the same age. And do you think that sometimes you just think, I don't want to work for somebody else, I can do this?
I think that is true. I remember my father said to me when I was much younger that you need to decide whether you want to work for other people or whether you want to work for yourself. And he said to me, there's no right or wrong, but you need to make that decision. Both my parents had set up their own businesses in different sectors. So I guess I had that entrepreneurial exposure from a very young age. And I've seen both my parents running their own small businesses. And when I started working for other people, I have to say, I don't know why they gave me a job, because I wouldn't give myself a job. I wasn't very good at being a team player or working in a wider team. I wasn't very good at listening or following. So that probably made me a quite rebellious type of employee. And that's where I thought, I don't fit in and I need to do something where I fit in. And the only thing I could see myself fitting in was something that I've created for myself. And this is what urged me to go and do that. And I think looking back, it was I've definitely done the right thing, but I think I did it a bit too early.
So did you look back and maybe not recognise the earlier yourself, the younger Afroditi? Did you think?
I do recognize, I'm still the same person. I don't think I've changed dramatically, but I think, I've learned an awful lot very, very quickly. I had to, because I gave myself a specific timeline. I thought, if this doesn't work out in the next 2 or 3 years, I really have to close it down. I didn't have the support or the financial backing of anyone, and I was trying to run a business that becomes self-sufficient. So you can't do that endlessly and forever. No, you have a time limitation. And that really kind of pushed me. It put me under a lot of stress, but also pushed me to go out and do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. So I'm pleased I was under this pressure, because Otherwise, maybe it wouldn't have worked out.
No, of course, if it was too relaxed, maybe.
Yeah.
No, sometimes you need a really steep learning curve.
I think so. I'm a believer in that.
So, as we've been chatting, I'm just sort of thinking, what was the main difference between, in your mind, the striking difference between product design and then going into, let's say, hospitality, restaurant design? What was the learning curve for you there?
Yeah, I mean, the design process is the same regardless of whether you're designing a glass for wine or a car or an airplane or a building. The actual design process is very much the same. The bit that's different is the technical knowledge and the understanding of the sector. And for me, going from product to designing restaurants and bars and hospitality spaces, there was a big change of scale. So products tend to be much smaller in scale. So you work a lot more on detail. So let's say you're designing, I don't know, an Apple computer, which is the world I come from. I would design electronics and electrical goods. You're really going to the minute detailing of literally 0.1 of a millimeter. Well, the minute you change scale and you design a whole space, the 1 millimeter difference doesn't make a big difference. And you have to zoom out and look at the slightly bigger picture. And so that's one big difference. And the other big difference is that products need to be replicated in big quantities. So if you design a mass-produced item, you need to think about production processes that make it efficient for reproduction. While a lot of the work that we do now are one-off spaces that will never be repeated. And that is the beauty and the challenge, because you never really design the same space twice. While with products, you spend a lot more time in advance to make something replicable. While with hospitality design, you spend less time in advance and you more problem solve as you go along, because it's a more theatrical one-off kind of scenario. So you need to think in a different way. You need to think more on your feet. It's less strategic, it's less future-proofing, it's more gut instinct. And that fits me a lot better as a character. I actually prefer it to the technical aspect of product design and the strategy aspect. But also what shocked me is in the world of hospitality, which I entered as an outsider, there was literally no strategy whatsoever, which to me came as a very surprising element. So you would meet a client, they would say, I have this space, I'm thinking of doing, I don't know, a pizza restaurant, and there you go ahead and design it. And you would say, but what is your strategy? How are you different to every other pizza operator? What is unique about you? And this is very typical product design thinking. When you enter the marketplace with, I don't know, a new telephone or a new car or a new laptop, you need to have a unique point of difference. You need to have a strategy as to how you sell your product versus your competitors. But in hospitality, that thinking, especially 20 years ago when I entered, kind of didn't exist. So it gave us as a studio a unique perspective, because we approach the world of hospitality in a slightly more strategic way than other studios. And I think that gives us a unique edge. So my product design background has actually helped in positioning us as a studio in a very unique way and having a very unique process that other agencies don't employ, which was a good accident, let's say.
So I take it you'd ask them for what their end goal is and work backwards, essentially.
Yeah. But, 100%. Usually people approach spatial design, whether you're designing a hotel or a restaurant or a bar, in a very architectural way, where you start thinking, what is the location, what is the light, what is the space? But they don't necessarily look at it as a product, If you're designing, I don't know, let's say Dishoom is an Indian restaurant, effectively beyond the space, it's a product that they need to open. It's a brand. You're creating a brand and a product that they need to take into different locations. So you need to think a bit of the end goal and their positioning in the whole wider picture. And I think interior designers and architects don't necessarily approach projects that way.
Yeah.
So we approached things very differently from the very beginning, and I'm pleased to say that hospitality is changing as a whole, because it's becoming a more competitive industry. So there is a lot more of this thinking that we've been advocating many years ago. There's a lot of this thinking now happening in our sector. But this, I would really credit my product design roots for this type of thinking.
Yeah. So would you say there is like a set formula for how you walk into an empty room and say, you know, for example, the toilets need to be this big, the kitchen space is this big, or are you led by the client, or do you have a bit of both? Is there a formula as well?
There is a general rule of thumb that applies to most restaurants, you know, so people would tell you most restaurants' back of house space versus front of house would be 35 to 40%. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. But then that varies, and you really need to take each project as a unique case study. We try to avoid this formulaic way of designing. We try to treat each project as a bespoke new piece of design. So some clients, you know, if you're working with a very established chef, back of house is more important to them than front of house. So they usually start the other way around.
Okay.
If you work with a more, how can I say, mid-market operator, front of house is more important to them than back of house, and operations are more critical in achieving volume. So each client has their own unique parameters and ambitions, and we have our own experience. And I think the greatest projects are really where you combine the skill set of both us and the client and their experience versus our experience, and really work in a very open, how can I say, conversationalist way, rather than imposing your thoughts onto the client or vice versa. So, you know, I always think if a client comes to us, it's because they don't want to impose their thinking onto us. They also want to hear our view. Otherwise, what's the point? They could do it by themselves.
True.
And vice versa. If we're just going to say this is how we do things and not listen to the clients, then we could design in isolation. It is a conversation that you need to take on board.
So you both hold each other's hands. You both go through the process.
Yes.
So are there any differences between, let's say, I know you work essentially worldwide, so is there any differences between doing a restaurant over here and anywhere else?
Yeah, massive differences. You need to really understand the cultural context. So we're currently researching for a project in Germany. You need to understand the cultural context, as in it's all about getting under the skin and the psychology of the consumer, the user at the end of the day. To me, that's the most important element, the most important person in the room, who's not actually in the room when we design things, but they're the invisible person that you as an operator, a chef, a designer, a company, a brand, whoever you are, need to think about. Ultimately, you're designing for them, you're planning for them. So we're trying always to immerse ourselves in the location and understand the needs of the user, and this change from location to location.
So how would a dining room in Germany differ to London or England even?
For example, one of our research pieces now that we're doing in Germany, we've come to a conclusion that the food and beverage world out there is slower, so things do not change as fast as they change in, let's say, the US, in New York or in London, and therefore design is less gimmicky and more classic. So whilst in a lot of very congested markets, let's say the US, let's say in London, there's a lot more need to be listened to, so design needs to become slightly more over the top, more visual, more Instagrammable, in a quieter place such as a city in Germany, where you don't have this massive influx of tourism, and restaurants tend to have a longer lifespan, is all about creating serenity and a place where people can go back to again and again and again and face more than once a week. So it's a different requirement. We are looking to do this project, as I said, in a city in Germany, which is 1 million population. You don't have this massive influx of tourism or transient kind of crowd. So this place that we're looking to design needs to work for the locals on a weekly basis. So the design needs to be very harmonious, and it needs to be a space where people can go again and again into. You've got London, which is a very different scenario. Let's say Mayfair. Restaurants are really now competing to get people to come in once, and sometimes they will never come back because the lifespan of these restaurants is shorter, and you've got this massive crowd that comes in and out of London, tourists, visitors, And it's a very different scenario. So you need to take all of these considerations in place. We've designed a restaurant in Kuwait years ago where the client said to us it's very, very important that privacy is respected because of the cultural setup of Kuwait, religion, culture. So it was very important for us to design it in a very specific way where one table from the next was far away and you have this privacy. While in other countries, that's not an issue. So you need to take all of these considerations.
So like, for example, if there was a restaurant in London that was 40 cover,
yeah.
in, let's say, Kuwait, for argument's sake, it would be 30?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or even less.
Or even less, really.
Yes.
So
I've just come back from a trip from LA in the States, and covers are much bigger in size than they would be in London. Literally seats, the chairs are bigger in size. So you look at a space which is 18,000 square feet, which for London standards is huge as a restaurant, and in LA that's kind of not a really massive restaurant. It's kind of big, but it's not massive.
So 18,000 square feet, how many covers would that give you in London, would you say, roughly?
It's a good question. We have looked at all our past projects in London and worked out that on average we have about 29 to 30 covers per 1,000 square foot. Mm-hmm. So you need to do the math, 18 times 30, whatever that is. So it would be almost, 500?
Yeah.
In the US, the restaurant we looked at, which is an existing restaurant, and it's 18,000, was not even 300 and something covers.
Wow. So bigger chairs, bigger tables.
And bigger spaces in general, everything is bigger. Everything is just bigger. So, in London, 18,000 square feet as a restaurant would be huge. They don't even exist, I don't think, as spaces. So there is all these different elements you need to take into consideration.
So do you think customers, not your customers, but customers of your customers today, do they want to see kitchens now? Like, do they want to see how the sausage is made as such?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's been a trend for opening kitchens as much as possible since I first started, to be honest. And it all goes back to this idea of transparency, trust. We live in a world where we don't trust people, we don't trust corporations, we question more, and everybody wants to be more involved and have visibility, transparency. That goes across all sectors. You look at the workspace. Workspace has changed in that sense. It used to be in the 60s, everybody would have their own small room where they would work in, and then it became open plan and more transparent. The same with restaurants, front of house and back of house. There's less of a rigid boundary. Customers definitely, I believe, want, across all sectors of hospitality, want to be more exposed to what's happening behind the scenes, get to see that, get to take pictures, get to be involved. So absolutely, and this is, I don't think this is going to change anytime soon. If anything, briefs now are asking us to challenge that even further. So not only you would open, let's say, the pass and make that more visible, now you're removing every barrier. Now you have more and more chef's tables where customers are sitting literally inside the kitchen, having first-hand kind of look as to how things are made, and this is definitely something.
I went to a restaurant in London just before Christmas. I can't remember where it was, and it's called Brat.
Oh yes.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, I love Brat.
And literally, we're sitting there, and we're sitting at the table, and it's right next to the kitchen.
That's a great example.
And I was sitting there, and my friend, he was with me, and he works at Bistro Bagatelle, and he's a chef.
Yeah.
So we're sitting there, and I said to him, would you feel good like this? He goes, I've never worked in an environment like that. I can't remember if he said he did, but I'm assuming he didn't work in an environment like that. And he goes, it's amazing how quiet they are.
Yes.
If it was go back 20 years with loud kitchens, you probably couldn't do that.
No.
But it gives you
Brad is a great example, actually. This is a great example of there's no delineation anymore. Their bar is literally a single counter with no back counter, so you can see everything.
Yeah.
Their oven is completely open. Everything is you don't know whether you're sitting front of house or back of house because there's no delineation.
There's no need for a chef's table because I felt like I was there.
Exactly. Yeah. They want the first Michelin star. And it requires a lot of discipline from kitchens in order to maintain that. So we always, again, there's no rule. we always, when clients say we want to have a more open kitchen, my first question is, can you maintain that? Do you have the discipline? Has your staff got the discipline? Because the worst thing you can do is open up your back of house and then suddenly it's completely unruly and there's dirt everywhere and rubbish, and that doesn't do.
The other amazing thing with Brat is that the majority of their cooking was in an open style oven. And you'd think that would throw in another problem into the mix as well, but there was no, which is well done to these guys. There was no issue whatsoever. They were very calm, and it's nice seeing the theatre of the food being cooked as well, but a lot of, I must admit, it was very interesting to see that.
I think the reason, the driving change, in my opinion, for this is people need to feel like they can trust what they're eating. It's a very important element to them. But also there is a real need, and hospitality is a great sector in that sense. There is a real need for experiences, experiential moments in your life. People don't go out just to eat. They can eat anywhere. I met years ago with the great Priscilla Carluccio, the ex-wife of Antonio Carluccio, the chef. And that was right at the beginning of my career. And she said, I always tell this story because it stayed with me for many, many years. She said to me, Aphrodite, why do you think people go out to restaurants? And I said, surely to eat great food. And she said, no, people can get great food anywhere. You might go into Waitrose and get great food, or they go, she said to me, they go to be looked after and create a memory and have a great time. And this is true more than ever nowadays, because with, I guess, the whole growth of digital, food, hospitality, travel it's still one of the analog experiences. So it becomes more and more important. We hold on to these experiences more because, you live in a very flat world. You're faced with a computer screen all day long. You've got your smartphone. While you go to a restaurant, you go to a great hotel, you go to a great bar, to a great spa, and it's a three-dimensional experience. And as human beings, we crave these experiences more and more, and that's why I think Brat is a great example of how they fulfill that. It's not a gimmicky place, yet at the same time, you feel that you're in a chef's table. As you said, wherever you're sat, it feels energetic, dynamic, magical. You feel like you're in a theater set, and it stays with you. And it stays with you even more than the actual food that you're eating. Although the food is amazing, I'm not saying it's not amazing. That whole experience stays with you for a very long time.
Do you think that maybe the generation below us, and I'm 35.
Yes.
I'm not going to give you your age.
I'm 45, I don't mind.
So do you think the generation, sort of our generation below, do you think that maybe they're getting rid of the expectation of being served? Like, if you think the British are very imperialistic, it's all about, you go to a restaurant to be served, white gloves, suits.
Yes.
Is that maybe falling by the wayside now, the formalities?
I think the formality for sure, 100%, but I still think majority of people go out to have a great time. That's really, yes, of course there's restaurants of convenience or hotels of convenience. I don't know, I've just left a meeting, I need to eat a sandwich on the way and I'm really hungry, and that fulfills a convenience. But a lot of the world of hospitality is about service and being looked after. And it might be done in a different way. It might be done in a more casual way, in a less formal way. But you still want, to me, the great success stories of the last decade are always about great operators. I really believe that. Not people who just provide a great product, whatever that is, but also look after people greatly. It might be done in a more casual way, in a more relaxed way, in a less formal way, but you still know that they're looking after you. And that happens in retail and in other sectors. I think if you look at Apple stores, for example, it's a great success story in the world of retail. It's, the service is not formal, yet you know that you're being looked after the minute you walk in. Somebody comes up to you, somebody takes you to the right place and looks after you. And this goes back to human needs, you need to feel not necessarily important, but special and loved and cared for. And that's why you go out.
I think one thing the Apple Store's done, and I'm a huge like, I go there a lot. But I think the one thing they've done is that they've removed lots of boundaries.
Yes.
But I still feel safe within the guidelines.
Exactly.
My brain doesn't feel lost.
Yeah.
And I know that when I look at you read like stories about architecture about either supermarkets or shopping malls.
Yeah.
And they say that they put really big roofs and they put lots of light and lots of sparkly things. It's to make you feel disorientated, so you spend money. And, and that's probably where they're using architecture in some ways to sort of benefit them and not the customer.
Yeah.
Whereas Apple's done the opposite, and I still feel that I know where I am, I know what I'm doing. I'm not disorientated.
Yeah.
I feel very within my guidelines, and
Yeah.
I think, but yet there's no formal till area. There's no.
Yes.
It's very different,
But I think all of that would fall apart if you didn't have the human element.
Yes,
And I think that's what they rely upon. They rely on that human element
to connect
everything. And we're seeing that more and more in the world of hospitality. Actually, years ago, we had a great brief from one of our very loved clients, Curzon Cinemas. We did the first Curzon Cinema in 2014. And the owner, the CEO, said to me, I want us to be like the Apple of the cinema world. And I said, I don't understand the connection. Initially felt like a very strange brief. And he said, people don't go to the Apple store just to buy a computer. They go because they want to connect to like-minded people. It's a place where they can go and have discussions, seminars. It's very fluid as a space. There's no boundaries, yet you know where you're going, what you're doing. And he brought that as a great analogy of what he wants to bring to the cinema experience. And I thought, what a great analogy, because the world of cinema has changed. You can download content anytime at home. You don't need to go out anymore for content.
You don't have to be home.
No, you don't even have to be home. You can be anywhere, exactly. But I think that human connection of connecting to other people, of going to a space which intrigues you, motivates you, changes your thinking, your perceptive, is still a need. And we're doing a project which it's just about to start, and the client was telling us that our neighbors in that location would be a company that sells electronic equipment, gadgets, headphones, but actually they don't sell anything. It's a new concept. You go into their stores and they don't sell anything to you, yet it's a place where you can get the best advice, and it's also like a showroom. If you want the best headphones, you can go there, you can look at all the ranges, you can get advice, you can follow talks and seminars and meet people and discuss things, but they actually don't sell you anything. So to me, these are the great briefs, when people bring this kind of thinking to the table and challenge you to break boundaries and think in a different way. And the world of hospitality is going through this, I wouldn't say existential crisis, but things have changed so much so quickly that we really need to keep that innovation to maintain what's good about our sector. Otherwise, our sector will go into a slight decline, I feel, unless this innovation is constantly put through the process.
I know it seems a bit basic, but, do you have to these days consider the lighting, because people will be using phones to take a photograph?
Yes, 100%, 100%. We had a client a few years ago. They're a high street premium burger chain who said to us, it's really important that we understand how our product is lit so people can take a picture, because, there's nothing worse than somebody trying to take a picture of their burger and the shadows over it and it's not lit properly. So yes, we do get to consider these new elements that come into the hospitality sector, social media, this experiential elements that I was talking about earlier. How do you keep a pace with a different type of service, a different customer who is younger and more transient and more fleeting and less loyal to brands. So there's all these elements.
I'd imagine that they're diametrically opposed, those two things, though. Like this room we're in now is a meeting room. It's very well lit. If I was to take a photo of my sandwich in this room, it would be very nice. But if we were having a nice dinner together, I think that it'd be a bit too light for me. So I can imagine, but it's finding that balance must be quite difficult.
Well, I've been misquoted recently. We did a project for Gordon Ramsay in central London, and I've been misquoted as somebody who is not a believer in Instagram, and I'm a believer that the analog experience needs to be even better than the digital experience. And to me, you need to prioritize. There's 101 parameters when designing a great restaurant, a great bar, a great hotel, a great spa. But you need to prioritize which parameters are more important to your customer, to your client as a designer, to you as a designer, and put all of that in the mix and prioritize. And to me, ultimately, the analog human experience of somebody walking into one of our spaces is the most important parameter. When they walk in, I want these people to feel that they've entered a unique and beautiful world, which is really atmospheric, really beautifully designed, and that it will help them have a great time and will remember that. If that also makes a great space for taking a picture for Instagram, that's great news. But I personally will not prioritize that over the dining experience or the drinking experience, because to me that's why you're going there. It's not a photographic studio. That's not the top priority. And yes, the lighting could be perfect for photography, but you're not going out to a restaurant to be in a photographic studio, effectively. So if you can hit all these elements, great news, but you need to set priorities. And I think a lot of, dare I say, more cynical type of operators are perhaps misplacing their priorities, in my opinion. And to me, in order to create long-lasting success stories, you need to ultimately go back to the consumer and say, what does this do to your consumer, to your experience? And if it's a great experience, they are more than likely to come back. If it's a mediocre experience, you know what? There's a million other great places opening up every single day. They will go somewhere else. So if you want to create long-lasting experience, you really need to go back to what does my customer want and how can I provide this?
So if we go back the 20 years you've been in business, it's not a long time, but it is. It's substantial. So what do you think is different today than when you first started? What considerations should you have? So we've said social media, but is there anything else, would you say?
Sustainability is definitely a massive element that, again, whether it's your own priority as a design studio or not, it's a priority of everybody else, so you need to take that into consideration.
So how would you, give me an example then, how would you, going into a project, how are you thinking, I need to be a bit more sustainable here? We talk about energy usage? Or?
Yes, that's a great example. So we are about to embark on a restaurant project where our client said, I would like it to be zero carbon footprint.
Okay.
He's very ambitious about it. They're an operator who've achieved quite a lot with other restaurants across the globe in terms of zero carbon. So one of the considerations, yes, how do we design a kitchen where the equipment uses less energy? How do we use energy throughout the day and reuse it at different times? When it comes to materials, how do we use materials that have got less of a footprint on the world? And this could be recycled materials. It could be materials that have traveled less. That's very, very important as well. For example, a very good example of how we can change the way we think is we specify furniture. There's very little challenge in thinking, where is this furniture coming from? You know, has it traveled miles and miles, and is there a better way of procuring this furniture from a closer place where the footprint will be less? When it comes to things like the obvious stuff, packaging, disposable packaging. Our industry is notoriously very bad when it comes to this disposable packaging. I was out with a client in the States a couple of weeks ago, as I said, and we went to one of their outlets, which is a small takeaway shop, and there was 8 of us. We had some food, and at the end of the meal, there was literally a mountain of packaging that we left behind, rubbish. And I said to them, this is really important. We need to consider how do we develop packaging that can be more efficient, creates less waste, less impact. So there's a whole world down to even simple things, like you get a lighting designer on a restaurant project. They come up with a lighting scheme, which obviously uses less energy overnight when the restaurant is not in use. And a classic thing that happens is the managers go and override that system and they leave all lights on all night long. And you think, why are you doing that? So it affects every element, the planning, the build, but also the day-to-day running of a place and management and, energy consumption. So you need to take all of that into consideration. But our industry, going back to your question, has changed. I think what's fascinating about our industry is one of the fastest moving industries. It's very, very responsive because it's very much on the front line. It's, let's say the aviation industry is notoriously slow in changing. Our industry is faster. It's a lot of young, smaller entrepreneurs who lead the way, and then the slightly bigger operators follow path. Yeah. But you don't have these massive setups of massive corporates who are very slow in responding. So that's what excites me. So when I entered 20 years ago, it was a very different world. And I think the other bigger parameter, in my opinion, is that it's a much more saturated sector now. So wherever you look at, food and beverage specifically, out of the whole hospitality, has had a massive growth in most countries. So it's a much more saturated market. And I think, as I said, the only way to break through that is to keep innovating and coming up with great future-proof ideas. And the other big challenge will be labor, because the labor market is changing again internationally. In London, in the UK, we know that there is a lack of labor for the food and beverage industry and hospitality. It's not a very attractive sector. So again, will AI change the way we do things? We will be less reliant on human beings in our sector. When will that change, and for which roles? How will that affect the design and the planning of a space, of a restaurant or a hotel or a bar? So all of these I really look forward to.
So can the way you design a hotel, restaurant, or hospitality room, let's say, can the way you design it make it more efficient on labour?
Yes, potentially. I don't think we can make massive improvements, but you can definitely take that into consideration, and especially when it comes to spatial planning. So, for example, we're doing a space out in Hong Kong where it's quite a big space, and the client wants to have this multi-zoned space arrangement where you've got retail, food retail, a bar, a casual dining room, a more elegant dining room, a more grab-and-go area, all under one big roof, under the same brand, same umbrella. So one of the things we've been looking at is how do we combine certain zones so you have less labor demands. So, simple example, let's say in that space he's got a gelato area where he sells ice cream, and right next to it is a coffee zone. If you design the counters in a way that they're very separate, you need somebody to operate the gelato parlor and somebody to operate the coffee parlor at all times, and this place is open from really early in the morning till very late at night. We looked into ways of how do we combine some of these zones, so at quieter times you only have one person operating both, and that reduces labor cost. So yes, you can have this type of efficiency, but again, it needs to be part of the initial discussion to understand. Or simple things that classic rookie mistake of especially younger designers in that industry is they don't understand how distances of waiter stations can affect labor costs. So if you only have one waiter station in a massive big room and runners have to run up and down all the time, that wastes time. So it's planning what the client needs in the right place to make operations run as smoothly as and without the need for exaggerated labor costs.
So when you're designing a room, how do you balance form and function?
They go together really, because one affects the other. And I know over the centuries, designers would debate form over function, but to me, they're actually we're debating the same thing. It's part and parcel. You know, if a wheel wasn't round, it wouldn't roll. So, it's a good example of how form and function come together. If the form of a wheel, when somebody invented the wheel, wasn't the form that it is, it wouldn't have the function that it has. So the two go together, one affects the other. Is there scenarios where one doesn't affect the other? Yes, of course, there's certain decisions where one does not necessarily affect the other, and that's when you're free to make some choices in things that are not affecting both. But in most scenarios, one decision affects the other. So again, going back to space planning, the space needs to look great on paper when you design it as a layout, but it also needs to function. And psychologically, the third parameter, in my opinion, is the psychological effect it has on people who use it. And this is perhaps another part of function we don't really understand very well, is how does this space make you feel as a user? Does it, you walk into, I don't know, a great hotel, and they've got this great big sweeping staircase, and that kind of invites you in. And that's not necessarily a functional thing. It's not because the steps are really big. The steps could be smaller and they will still function all right. But psychologically, it pulls you, it draws you in. And that to me is another functional element that's not got to do with what we define as form and function, but it's almost like the third element that you need to consider. So yes, a staircase of X size threads will work, but how does it make you feel? And to me, that's another layer that you always need to question, because we work in a very emotional type of sector. As I said earlier, is not all about ticking functional boxes. There's the element of people wanting to go and have a great time, and how do you tick that box? That's a very big box.
I suppose if the consumer who was sitting in that environment didn't feel right before they even ordered, if they've got a weird feeling about something, they will
hate the food.
They're just not going to like it, are they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
and there's a lot of research now around that sector.
So in that case, then, how do you? Probably you don't have to do this as much today, but how do you get people to understand how design is so important based on that? I'm so pleased you asked this. I think people undervalue design. They don't understand what it encompasses. That's part of a general misunderstanding of what design is, and a misrepresentation, in my opinion, of design. But also it also shows how bad our industry, the design industry, I mean, now I'm talking on behalf of the design industry, how not effective we've been in explaining what our sector can do and what it's there for, and its effectiveness. And usually when you talk about design effectiveness, people get to yawn and they think, oh God, this is a really boring subject. It's not very exciting. And usually it's because it's presented in a very poor way, and there's no great examples of people. I'll give you a small example. When I go into a meeting with, let's say, a QS, a quantity surveyor, they usually say, oh God, here comes trouble, here comes a designer, the people who want to spend more. And this is a classic misunderstanding of what design is about. People think design is about luxury, it's an elitist world, it's about making things look beautiful, therefore it's only for a very specific audience, therefore it's always going to cost more. And actually, that's not true. Somebody designed the paperclip. That cost nothing. But somebody actually designed it. Yeah. Somebody actually came up with a shape and how it's going to be made and how it's going to be put together and how it's going to function. So design is not about making things look pretty. Yes, that's part of it. Or making things look more luxurious or more expensive. I think it's because there's this terminology, designer clothes or designer goods. Yeah. People associate designer with being expensive. That's not what design is about. Design is about ultimately making a series of decisions and making something appropriate to its use, whatever that use is. Whether it's a room that needs to sell fish and chips in your scenario, in your sector, or whether it's a car that needs to go really fast, or whether it's whatever it is, you're making appropriate decisions to effectively make something be appropriate for its use. And this is where design effectiveness comes in place, and this is where people don't understand that.
I always am quite unashamed in talking about how financially successful some of our projects have been. And it's almost like a dirty world where designers don't want to talk about finance. They don't want to talk about money because we're seen as these creative geniuses, artists who money is beyond us. But actually, when design works extremely well, it brings results, real results to real people, to real businesses. It has a massive effect on businesses. And when you analyze the cost of it versus the return, it's actually a fantastic ratio. You usually don't spend an awful lot on a design. You spend X, but you usually get multiple returns for years to come.
So the common misconception with design is just that, I suppose, is that people just think it's the way it looks, but it's not. It's the utility.
No.
It's everything.
It's everything.
Yeah.
It's people don't realize that they're making design decisions on a day-to-day basis. You know, a great designer, Tom Dixon, who I have great admiration of, once said, and I think he's got a very fair point. He said, you know, let's say you're rearranging your library at home. You know, you've got a bookcase. You just went to IKEA, bought a bookcase, you're now about to rearrange all your books. And you will make certain decisions as to how you want this. You might say, for example, I'll put them all in an order of how much I use them. So I'll put the books that I use the most in this top shelf that I can reach easier, and I'll put the other books lower down. That might be your decision. You're making a design decision there. This is design, making these decisions. Somebody else might say, I'll actually prefer to have them in an order of how big they are. So I'll start with the very tall books and go to the smaller books. And all of this is actually the process of designing, making decisions, understanding parameters, and making appropriate choices. But it's not just about how it will look, but how this thing will work, how you will operate it, how you would use this book. So all of that is part of design, but you're absolutely right. People just associate it with looks, and that really personally bugs me. So I always try to do my best in spending time to kind of spread the word of what design can do for businesses. So I try to attend as much as I can conferences or areas where designers don't really attend or be part of. I've been asked several times and I've participated in board meetings, where you get men in suits, and design is not really an important parameter to them, but to kind of make companies understand how a design-led business and an innovative-led business can actually bring real results in the real world. And a great example of that, in my opinion, is IKEA. It's a design-led business. Design has paved the way of their massive success across the world, yet it's not about making things look pretty or making things expensive. It's about making things appropriate for the customer base that they are targeting.
They're not the prettiest things, but they hit that utility perfectly, don't they? It's like, this is a table, we don't need all these frills if it's hitting that cost price, and that's it.
Yeah, and this is where their position is. So what they do is appropriate for that position.
They work to their strength.
Yes. If they were trying to sell a £3,000 chair to a collector of designer furniture, that's not the right approach.
Well, I guess that you can't compare IKEA with an Eaves furniture.
Yeah,
you?
exactly.
You've got to hit that price point and the utility where it's.
That's exactly it. And I think this is the bit that people don't understand. They always associate design with something premium, which is not the case. Design happens on all levels.
You've almost got to be able to say, I like that design for what it cost.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's all relative, isn't it?
It's all very relative, 100%.
So, this is a bit of a not loaded, but it's a lot of questions sort of thing. But, this goes to sort of like the projects that you like to do. Do you like open projects, closed projects? Can you be creative? Do you like timeless versus artistic jobs? This is just more about your personal thinking about a job.
Yeah, I think the projects that I enjoy the most, especially as I'm growing slightly older and wiser, are the projects where I have a client who would really push us and challenge us, because to me that's the most important element. The best work we've ever done is when we had a partner who would work on the same level as us, as in really have that quite big ambition to do something different, do things better, but also challenge us internally as to how we can push ourselves to the next level. And to me, that's very, very important, because it's very easy, especially now that we've got a bit more of an experience as a studio. You know, we are a bit more established. We've done over 150 projects, you know. It's very easy to think, oh, I know how to do it, and I've got a formula, and this would work, and I can repeat myself. But for me and my team, it's very important to work with somebody who will ultimately come up with a brief that will push us to do something we've never done before, or will challenge the way we do it, and we will end up discovering and learning something new. And whether they're open or closed, it used to be, when I was younger, I would think, oh, these very open briefs kind of scared me. And when there was more restrictions, I found them more interesting, because it was almost like trying to solve a puzzle, you know, and you think, oh, I'm a very patient type of character in that sense. I would like, not patient, but quite strong-minded. And I would sit until I resolve things, you know, like almost obsessively. And I enjoyed that. But now, as I'm growing, as I said, slightly more experienced, the projects that I really enjoy are the ones that really challenge my thinking and challenge my team's thinking as well, and makes us think in a different way, or makes us re-establish how we do things. And this is a very great and difficult balance to strike from a client side, because ultimately the best clients we've ever had are the people who want our opinion, but yet at the same time will not agree with everything we say. And you don't want somebody who just overrides you constantly, because then you think, what's the point? You know, if you have your own opinion, why are you collaborating with someone? But at the same time, we don't want somebody who just everything we present is great, but somebody who really says, have you thought of doing things like that? And then you think, oh, wow, I didn't think of that, but that's actually, it's a great improvement to what we've been putting on the table. And these are the projects I enjoy the most.
So I was surprised. I was doing a bit of research, and I was surprised where you said that you don't mind very closed briefs because it forces you to be more creative.
Yes,
whereas,
I think they do.
Yeah, whereas I was thinking to myself, well, if it was open, you can be creative. But in some ways, you probably get lost when there's a lot of openness in it.
And also, yes, there's a tendency to get lost, but also I think you don't have any barriers to break. In many ways, I like breaking barriers and molds and challenging things. I think naturally I'm a slight anarchic person in that sense. I like challenging things. And if there's nothing to challenge, then I feel there's no real challenge there for me. Well, if somebody gives me something close and then I go back and I say, oh, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? It really allows the brief to develop and progress, and our thinking to progress and to really evolve things. So I enjoy these challenges.
I suppose it gives you a boundary to push to
yes,
that client
correct.
as well, doesn't it? So
yes.
They've given you a line, and now it's your job to say, well, I believe this.
Yes, and push that line.
Push it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can see that in your personality, that you probably,
yes.
you probably enjoy doing that.
Sure. I'm that transparent. yeah.
So,
yeah. I think it's the Greek in me. We like we like rebelling in general, you know. We don't like taking kind of, what's the name? Following rules, we're very undisciplined and unruly as a culture. So I think maybe that's the Greek in me.
It's true. I would agree with that. I've just got to be careful because lots of my customers listen to this.
In a great way.
So, you know, if we look at independents versus sort of like independent restaurants versus sort of like your bigger chains, do you see them pushing ahead at the moment, really sort of, you know, being quite different and fresh and pushing the industry forward?
Yeah, 100%. I have to say we did in the past a lot of work with high street, great big chains. And in the last few years, we're not doing as much of it simply because I think they're all in a place of panic. And I'm talking about the UK market now, not the international market, because it's a different picture. But the UK market, a lot of the high street chains have gone through, as we all know, very difficult times with a lot of challenges, with a lot of increases in cost, a lot of declining sales. And they're in a mode where they're trying to salvage rather than push. And I find that a very bad place for great design. It's a combination of very negative kind of parameters to really create things of innovation. So we've been approached from fairly few high street chains to help them navigate, but they don't have any new ideas to put on the table. They don't have any new thinking. Is more, oh, I used to be a great brand and now I'm not, and I'm not selling well, so what can I do? It's a very difficult place to start because you're salvaging, and it takes many years of commitment to turn that around.
Yep.
And a lot of the people who are leading this corporate world kind of establishments don't have that kind of commitment or that passion or that long-term thinking. They're there for a very short time. So you think, how am I gonna, I cannot do this alone. I need the internal support. And if the internal structure and support is not there, yes, we can put the greatest ideas on the table, but they will go nowhere. And this is where I feel a bit that this world is going. There's very few companies which are still innovating within the high street chains.
Well, I think if you look, 20 years ago, let's say, Pret-a-Manger was very, at the forefront. Mm-hmm. And it's not that they're boring, it's that everyone else has probably caught up with them a little bit. And now their look is very cliche, and everyone everybody who wants to have the same ambition as them will essentially copy them.
Yes.
How does a company like that say, we need to push forward when everyone's been copying this?
I think actually Pret-a-Manger is a good example of one of these big operators who are constantly pushing forward, and they are way ahead of the game in comparison to their competition, and that's why they are not necessarily suffering as much as a lot of their competition. So I have quite a lot of respect for Pret-a-Manger, but at the same time, as I said earlier, this comes from an internal mentality and culture of innovation that always existed right from the beginning. When this company was set up, there was a lot of innovative thinking, and that culture has maintained itself within the organization. On the contrary, on the other side of the spectrum, and I won't be specific, you have a lot of people who never had that culture of innovation, and it was a Me Too type of brand. There was a lot of brands which were Me Too, and there was a ride on the wave of success on the back of other brands, and they're the ones who are mainly suffering now. And as I said, they go out to designers like ourselves and other studios, and they're like, oh, help, what can we do? And it's very hard to help them because they need to effectively understand that this is not just something you buy and plonk it in. They need to change the whole way they do things, but they're not ready to go through this change. So therefore, you're wasting your time because, they're not ready to embrace all this thinking. And this is where we are now a bit more careful in who we work with in that sense, because your work is only as good as your client.
Of course. So I suppose in some ways the difference between the one we named Pret-a-Manger, who is at the forefront, they have ethics, it runs through, it's not just an image.
Yeah.
Whereas with the others, it is just, how much can we pay you to copy this?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a facade, it's an
yes,
image.
It is.
Whereas with Pret-a-Manger and people like that, it runs deep.
Yes,
all the way through.
It does run deep, and they're design-led by nature as businesses. They've always been design-led, and that's what I'm saying. A lot of the other companies are not necessarily that, and to change a whole company internally is not really my role, or to lead that innovation internally within a business.
That's true.
We are consultants after all, so there needs to be that support system, and there needs to be, if you look at somebody like McDonald's, for example, which people always underestimate, in order to change the perception, the negative perception of their brand, it took decades. It took years and years and years of hard work, blood, sweat and tears. So I remember in the 90s, I was a graduate designer, and there would be all this, really negative image. They were hit by one kind of scandal after the other, and, the world was changing, and people are moving away from fast food, and McDonald's became kind of like the epitome of this big corporate, blah, blah. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree. That's not my point here. My point is they knew that to turn this around, that brand perception, they had to work on this for many, many, many years. It wasn't a short-term strategy. And in many ways, they've done a great job in turning that perception around and changing this huge organization around. But it didn't happen overnight. No. And there was a massive commitment of time, money, effort to do that. And I think this is the problem with a lot of these brands who are suffering. They don't understand how long it would take to turn things around. And it's much easier to start a new brand than change the negative perception of an existing brand. This is much, much harder. Yeah. So if I went tomorrow out and I said, I don't know, X brand is not doing well, they have a negative image, they used to have a positive image, now they have a negative image, it's much easier to say, close that brand down, put a new brand in, create a new brand, job done. But if you want to keep the brand for whatever reason, you need to think, how long will it take me to change that negative perception? It takes a lot longer. And do you have the commitment, the money, the support to do it? And if you don't, it's a waste of time.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I think I do agree with one thing that you said, and that is that McDonald's are massively underestimated. Every time, people just always underestimate them. And I think that, just when you look at how in the, let's say, the 90s, early 2000s, everything was red, yellow.
Yeah.
It was plastic. It was how we imagined America to be.
Yes.
And then, obviously, they changed the design to browns and more pastel colours and, softer seats and, no more plastic. Plastic was gone. And, well, I'm sure it was some form of plastic. Yeah. But what I'm getting at is that they literally shifted everything. And I think
they shifted everything, yes, 100%. Yeah. I mean, you pass by McDonald's, it's quite interesting. You don't even see the word McDonald's anymore.
No, it's just a big M and that's it. Yeah.
So that was, but again, that didn't happen overnight. And it didn't take a couple of people just sitting, sketching away. It was a whole internal change.
I think with McDonald's, if you look back, it looks very drastic, the change, but I think it's been evolution, not revolution. Yeah. They've evolved very gradually.
Exactly.
I know, we're looking back 20 years, it looks massive, but I think if you look at it forward, it's been 5-year plans.
Yes. And I think this is the thing that people don't realize. You open a McDonald's, a new brand, you open a new hotel, a new whatever it is that you're doing in the hospitality industry, there is no end to the design process. Just because you open, it doesn't mean that's the end. You need to keep evolving, you need to keep pushing, you need to keep changing, you need to keep revisiting your spaces, freshening them up, redesigning them, maintaining them. And that's the other part that people don't do. They think, oh, this restaurant is doing great, I don't need to invest in looking at the space. I don't know who was telling me about an operator who... somebody was telling me apparently Ottolenghi does a spruce up of all the restaurants every 2 years. Customers hardly notice, but they do. They change a few things.
It's just a little thing every few years.
They might, change. Somebody was telling me that works with them. I don't know if it's true. Apologies to Ottolenghi if it's wrong. But apparently, they might change a piece of art or paint a wall or clean up something. And you need that, and that shows love and care. It's a bit like your home, you don't just let your home all, go to rot before you start fixing it.
Yeah, you don't move into a house and say, that's it, I'm just going to leave it as that for 30 years. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. So here's a question. So what would you say, does Aphroditi have a design philosophy? Is there a signature look to your work?
No, there's no, not that one that we advocate or consciously put on the table. And I actually have a bit of a pet hate for signature looks. So I always thought this is not the way to do design, personally. That's again, other people might not agree, but that's my personal view. I'm not saying it's right, that's my own view. To me, we have a signature process in the way we do things and the way we approach things, and a very strong vision of how design should work for a client and for a space. But it doesn't mean that the end result looks the same. It means that the end result will be unique every time, but it will go through a similar process. And I do not see how you can go to completely different clients and propose the same design solutions. And to me, this signature look is effectively saying that there's one solution that fits all, and I actually believe the complete opposite in design. You need to be very specific and very relevant to the specific parameters in place, and no project has the same parameters. So saying that one size fits all doesn't make sense. It goes against everything I believe in many ways.
I suppose the example that I gave you last time we met was that if you think of Oliver Payton's restaurant Coast, and Mark Newson designed it, and within a few years it needed a redesign, and essentially they said that was his art piece, it was his, you know?
Yes.
But you're saying no, it's all about the customer's requests,
yes,
what the customer wants.
I mean, Mark Newson is a great example. He had a very specific signature visual look that he applied across Qantas airplanes, Oliver Payton restaurants. And, you know, as an Oliver Payton or whoever you were, the client of Mark Newson, you knew what you're going to get in the end. So that, I guess, made it safer as a choice from a client perspective, because you know what you're going to get at the end, and also probably made it a bit easier for the design agency to design, because you kind of know what the end look and feel would be, you know, the way you're going. But to me, I feel, how can you, let's say you were to design 20 restaurants, and Mark Newson actually doesn't fall in that category because he didn't do many restaurants and he didn't do many airplanes and he didn't do many pieces of furniture. He actually worked across many different sectors and didn't produce quantities under one sector. But let's say if he was to do 20 restaurants and they all looked Mark Newson and they're completely different, one, I don't know, one is a 10-pound pizza place and the other one is a 100-pound bespoke menu, how can you have the same design? To me, that doesn't make sense. But I think we can take out Mark Newson because it's probably a good example of how to do it. But I think what happens in our industry a lot is that you go to restaurants and you think, oh, I know who the designer is, because they're applying effectively the same solution across the whole client list. And if I was the client, personally, I would feel, why do I want my restaurant to look the same as my competitors? And to me, that's not right. But at the same time, I can see why clients do it. It makes it easier, as I said. It's an easier choice. It's less risk. And they might want this very specific look. So they might say, I want this very specific look. But anyhow, going back to how we do things, because I don't really look at how other people do things. I look at how we do things. To me, that's not what I want to be doing in my life. As I said, I love it when somebody comes with something that challenges, that makes us think in another way and helps us reinvent our way of doing things and find new solutions to world-age-old problems. So this is the projects that I love working, and that's why I don't believe in the signature look. I believe more in the approach is the same, but the end result will hopefully be different every single time.
So I'm just, now you've said that, I'm sort of thinking, how do you feel after the project's done, 2 years down the line, you go to the Curzon cinema, or you go to the Lucky Cat, or you go to Suvlaki, and you're sitting there eating, you're a customer. Yes. It's your baby, though, in a way. Are you attached like that? Or?
First of all, I try to avoid going as much as I can, because I think you never really take a proper time off in any of these places. They still become work, you know. You go around and you think, oh, I don't know, this is broken. I need to tell the manager, they need to look into this. Why has this changed? Why did they move this chair to the other side? It was supposed to be here. So, you know, as a designer, I think you hardly ever let go. You're it is your baby.
You feel responsible.
Yeah, you feel responsible.
You see a big scratch on the wall.
Yeah.
Or something.
Exactly. And then instead of relaxing, I constantly look around, you know. And I go to a lot of our restaurants quite often because, I don't know, my friends want to see them, or I want to see the team. I haven't seen them in a while, or I might want to take a client to show them around or whatever. So I do go quite often, but it's never a relaxing experience, I'll be very honest, because I sit there and I'm constantly checking. So I'm never really sitting fully enjoying my meal or my movie. I'm constantly like thinking, even, you know, when it comes to how we did things, I always think, we should have done that differently. We made a mistake. Next one we should do like that. So it always becomes work effectively.
Yeah. So one thing that I always find interesting is the stereotypes of ethnic restaurants.
Yes.
So and you sort of made it easy for me to understand. But I sometimes probably get offended when I see over-the-top stereotypes. So, for example, Greek restaurants, blue and white everywhere, and well, blue and white for Greece, and obviously yellow and sort of green if you're Cypriot, and then obviously the Italians and the Indians, and everything's a very heavy stereotype. And then, but last week I met Afroditi Krassa. And I went to
guy.
And I went to his restaurant in Kanishka in Mayfair. And you're sitting there, you don't even think, if you close your eyes, you can't smell Indian food, doesn't look like Indian food, the dining room doesn't feel Indian at all. And then we used other Indian restaurants as examples, and he said, like, you know, he doesn't want his restaurant to feel stereotypically, you know, an Indian restaurant. But you were saying that there is a reason why certain restaurants will have a very stereotypical look about them. And you thought it was maybe because if you're in a very busy area, you need to shout out from the front, this is Greek, without people coming in.
Yeah, I think that's important. But also, I think people are scared of the stereotypical look because they don't realize that you can change that, you know, you can be innovative with that in a slightly rebellious way, you know, or you can find an interesting new way of doing something stereotypical. So we've been tasked many times to do restaurants of different provenance, and I actually really love these projects because it allows us to research and immerse ourselves culturally. You know, we did an Indian restaurant, Dishoom, that didn't look like your typical Indian restaurant, but at the same time, you know that it's not from here. It's not from the UK. It comes from somewhere else. You might not understand where. And this is the intriguing part. So I think you go into Dishoom, you know that this is not British, you know it's not French, it's not continental, where is it from? And you feel like you're immersed in another culture, but you're discovering, in my opinion, a new side of this culture that you thought you knew. So we thought we knew Indian restaurants, and when I went back to the client, when we started that project, I said to them, people have got a very stereotypical view of India. They expect all restaurants, and I remember I went back with 5 kind of like stereotypes. You know, they expect them to be very colorful, they expect them to be very decorative, they expect them to be very, how can I say, natural in terms of materials. Like you don't associate India with plastics or metals, you maybe associate them with woods and carvings and stones. So I went back with all these stereotypical views, but then I said to them, there's also a few things which are real gems, and that's actually a process every time. We go back with stereotypes and the hidden gems. And I went back to them and I said, there's all these hidden gems about India that people don't know about and don't associate themselves with. And one of them was this whole idea of this Bombay cafe that effectively became Dishoom at the end, of these places that look almost old European bistro-like, but they're Indian and they're weird. And I think to me, this is where projects become interesting, where you discover something that is not obvious, it's new, and it breaks boundaries. And when Dishoom first opened, people used to say to me, majority of people would say to me, wow, we didn't expect an Indian restaurant would look like that. It looks nothing like your stereotypical view of India. Yet at the same time, Indian people would call me and say, wow, we can't believe a Greek person designed an Indian restaurant with such authentic references to India. So it was both ways, like really interesting feedback. And I can see what Atul is saying, and I know where this is coming from. But at the same time, I think that whatever culture you're representing, you can find nuggets of gold that you can bring out, which bring an authentic, interesting slice of that culture that we're not exposed to. And when we did Suvlaki, which is Greek, obviously, you know, we took the obvious stereotypes, but we subverted them, we changed them. So it is blue and white, and it's actually got columns, Greek columns everywhere. And when we did that, everybody thought I've lost my literally my marbles. People would call me and say, oh, especially in the Greek community, people would call and say, oh, we heard you're doing a Greek restaurant where you're using ancient Greek columns. You know, to Greek people, this is anathema. It's all the stereotype of like a cheesy Greek touristic taverna. And I said, yeah, I am, but wait until you see it, it's going to be different. And it's truly different because it's using literally a ton of concrete, plastering a whole wall of columns, which nobody has done before. So I don't think it's what you do, it's how you do it. And a great example, going back to Pret, a great example of that is Pret. Pret is not selling anything new, it's sandwiches. But it's how they did it, which was different. And I think this is where people get scared. They think, I need to move away from the obvious. I don't think you need to move away from the obvious, but you need to find a completely different way of doing this. So if people pass by Suvlaki and they think that's obviously Greek, that's great news because it communicates, as you said earlier. But also, they look at it and they think, it's not what I expected from a Greek place. And to me, that's a great result.
So you just touched on it a little bit, but is cultural appropriation a big deal? So
Cultural appropriation, wow, this is a whole massive...
you've seen a little bit of this with the Lucky Cat.
Yeah, we've seen it now everywhere with the whole... To me, it's a whole big subject of, drawing the line. And I think, when it comes to certain things, I don't understand the big fuss. So, for example, if I'm a Greek chef, I don't need to work in a Greek restaurant. Mm-hmm. If you're actually Suvlaki, the food is designed by an Indian chef. Somebody who worked for Attu, Alfred Prasad, who is the youngest Indian chef to ever get a Michelin star. He got a Michelin star at a younger age than any other Michelin-starred Indian chef. And he's the consultant chef for Suvlaki. And if you take cultural appropriation as for its face value, maybe he shouldn't be working on it, Maybe it's wrong for him to appropriate Greek cuisine when he's not Greek. But
he's not appropriating it. He's not saying it's his.
Well, it is his cuisine. He's taken elements and turned it into his.
But he's not saying the Greek cuisine is his.
No, he's not saying the Greek cuisine is his, but let's say, going back to the Lucky Cat, it's saying somebody who's not Asian should not be designing Asian food because they're appropriating it.
I just think that's really bad. I don't know. I just think, as in, I'm not in favour of that argument. I think that if I want, for example, the high majority of fish and chip shops in, let's say, the middle part of the UK are owned by Cypriots.
Yes.
And Indians, to be fair.
Yes.
No one is saying, the British aren't saying, you came over here and stole our food. I don't know. I just...
Yes, because the Brits, I think, are not saying that because they're not a minority.
Okay. So,
but if it was a minority scenario...
So if an English person opened an Indian restaurant, which I'm sure exists, well, in Liverpool, for example, a lot of Chinese restaurants are owned by English people. No one there says, this ain't right. I'm sure. Well, maybe someone does now, but I don't know. I just think...
I mean, I don't know about other scenarios, but, the scenarios I've seen, a lot of people are complaining about somebody appropriating somebody else's culture. And usually, to me, it seems to be a minority culture, which is appropriated by, let's say, the dominant culture of white, male, British. That's usually, I haven't really seen it the other way around. And to me, surely, we should live in a world where everybody's allowed to do whatever they want, as long as it's true and honest and not done for the wrong reasons. And I think, to me, it goes back to how you do things, not what you do. And I think this is the bit we need to investigate. And I might sound controversial, but we live in a world where so much political correctness is coming in that we're looking more at face value and labeling and being correct rather than the why. We're not looking deeply into the why and the how, but we're looking at a very kind of, how can I say, skin deep kind of thinking. And this is what bothers me sometimes, that there needs to be a healthy debate rather than, oh, you're so-and-so, you shouldn't be doing that. Who are you to judge what should be done or should not be done? I think we need to have a healthy debate as to what's right and wrong.
I think the biggest problem with the whole Gordon Ramsay group thing was the fact that it was probably Gordon Ramsay. I think if it wasn't anybody else, nobody, because he's not, but that group is not the first company to do something like that.
I mean, I can't comment specifically on Gordon Ramsay, and I wouldn't. That's not really my area of expertise, and that's not my role. And I'm not even referring to Lucky Cat, because there's been other scenarios with other projects of ours where there was cultural appropriation. And
so you've had this quite regularly?
Yeah, it's becoming a more regular thing.
Really? Okay.
Yes, and again, I don't want to be specific, because, it's not right for our clients to be specific. But I think we need in our industry to have a healthy understanding as to why we're doing this. What is the reason? What is the objection? And what are we trying to achieve? And if people are, I personally, if somebody does things for the right reasons, I'm open for them to do whatever they want, as long as it doesn't offend me and doesn't offend anybody else. I'm happy for them to do what they want.
As a British-born Cypriot, if I met an English person that did a Greek restaurant or a Cypriot restaurant, I've got to be honest, I don't think it would bother me. I'd probably be excited by it. I think I'd like to see...
And if that person came and said, look, we want to do a kind of interesting take on Cypriot culture and we want to present it to the world, I wouldn't feel like they're stealing my culture. I would think that maybe they're adding to my culture. If, of course, they're only doing it in a very cynical way and spreading out, I don't know, the wrong type of information or approaching it in a totally insensitive way, perhaps I would feel a bit offended. Yeah. But I think we're becoming a bit sensitive for some things that might not be that important. That's what I'm saying.
I think, there's bigger things, there's bigger challenges.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's not the biggest thing. Like, I think, we touched on it earlier. There is bigger equality issues at stake, and I think that's not one of them, in my view.
No, I think to me there's if I was to look at who's doing right or wrong in our industry, I would look at, are people fair employers? Are they paying people and treating people fairly? Are they, approaching their industry in a way that there is integrity? And that's in every industry. Or are they pure cynicals trying to just make a quick buck? And to me, these are bigger, more important questions. And I think sometimes in today's world, and I'm not talking about cultural appropriation specifically, I think we're more obsessed with the minute details and kind of missing the bigger picture. And to me, I come from a minority background in many, many different ways, and I think we need to zoom out a bit and understand why is the reason we're having these debates, and are they improving the world we're living in? And if they're not, and it's just for the sake of argument and outrage, then we shouldn't be having them.
Sometimes these arguments only exist in one place, and that's Twitter. I'm not being funny. Like, it doesn't, I'm sure these restaurants that have all been accused of cultural appropriation, or actors that have been accused of cultural appropriation, people still go to the cinema to watch those films. They still go to those restaurants to eat that food, in my view. I think that it exists in a bubble, and I think that it doesn't change anything, in my view. Maybe I'm wrong. I suppose
Perhaps it does, I don't know.
Maybe it just makes you a bit more cautious when you do your work, maybe.
Well, yes or no. I believe that as a studio we approach things with real integrity. I believe that fundamentally. So in the end of the day, if somebody is asking me to design an Indian restaurant and I'm not Greek, and I dive into Indian culture and bring something that I believe is interesting, exciting, I'll still bring it out to the market because I think we're doing it with integrity and with sensitivity. And if somebody disagrees, I'm happy to be challenged, and that's fine.
Is there a piece of advice you would give anybody that mostly gets ignored but shouldn't be ignored? What piece of advice would you give somebody that should never be ignored?
Oh, wow, that's a very difficult question. What kind of advice should I give someone that always gets ignored?
Well, not always gets ignored, but should never get ignored.
I don't know. I can only look at things from my perspective. I think wait, be patient and wait is always the advice I've been given, and I ignored it, especially when I was younger, because I lacked in patience. I still do. I want things to move quickly and things to change and progress, whether within my business or my client's business. And I would say if people tell you to wait, there's usually a good reason why you should listen to that. But I know at the same time that the advice that will get ignored will continue getting ignored no matter what I say.
Okay, fair enough, because they've already got it in their mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like you wanted to rush.
Yes, exactly. No matter what people would tell me, I would still rush.
So have you seen any sort of I read an article that was saying that in America and large, maybe cosmopolitan areas, that they're building apartments now without kitchens. Have you read of this anywhere? Have you seen any of that?
That's been going on for a long, long time. I think the first British London apartments with no kitchens, kitchenless, were in Covent Garden almost a decade ago.
Really?
So and I'm not surprised, if you buy property in central London like Covent Garden, it's probably that you're not going to live there permanently. True. You're only there as a pied-à-terre. Cooking will not be your highest priority. So
if you could afford a second house in Covent Garden, you're probably going out every night to eat, maybe.
Exactly,
as well,
exactly. So
that makes sense. So finishing off now, who would you say has been an influence to you over the years?
Several people, and I'm very grateful that at different times, and going back to one of your earlier questions about setting up in business, which is very important, I was very lucky to be granted with the Prince of Wales grant when I set up. And the great thing about that grant is that not only I got financial support, which really helped out in the first few years, I also had a great mentor, business mentor, who helped me with business advice, and he really helped me feel confident and believe in myself at times where you really don't believe in yourself and you have doubts about what you're doing and you think, this is not going anywhere. Will I ever make it? Will I ever succeed? And he would always give me his perspective on how I should look at how well I'm doing when I would think I'm not doing very well. So that really helped me, and I'm very grateful for that help. And a lot of these organizations, and that's where the UK is really great, this help comes for free, and it's very generous by people who are extremely generous with their time, very, very accomplished and successful people who are very generous in helping youngers. And I was very lucky to have this great mentor, Giles Widoger, if he's listening. Then I went on to have a great client mentor who was Julian Metcalf, the founder of Pret and Itsu, who's still a friend, still a client, and still very much somebody that kind of shaped my thinking, not only in terms of design and how to create brands, from one of the most great person in creating brands, but also in terms of how to run a business which is people-led and how to trust people, believe in people, and help people grow. And he really taught me on how to delegate and give other people who surround me the freedom to do things. So he really influenced me and shaped me in that way. And I always think, when I go through difficult decisions in the studio, how would he approach things? And I always try to second guess how he would approach things. And although he probably doesn't realize, he still kind of guides me in that way. And obviously my partner, who sits and listens to my moans and complaints on a daily basis. So everybody, not just myself, not everybody, but most people on the planet might not even realize we are all very lucky to be loved, supported, and looked after by a whole load of people. And they shape you. And I always think life is about people, and that's why I'm led more and more in choosing projects where you create great partnerships with great people. Likewise, within the studio, to me, it's more important on growing the team the right way rather than just growing financially and getting more projects in. That's more important to me. So I think the older I'm becoming, the more I realize how the people element is the most important in my life, and that's why I enjoy being in this sector.
I suppose as you've got more established, you can afford to say no. So if there's someone you don't want to work with or you don't feel the connection,
yes,
you can say no.
Yeah, I have to say, in a very foolish and slightly arrogant way, I did that even when I couldn't afford it.
That's That's the Greek in you.
I would say, no, I don't care, that's it. And you know, and I really don't regret that, because I think being selective is a good thing. Our life, our time on this planet is quite short, so you need to make certain decisions. You can't do everything. You can't work with everyone. You can't achieve all the things you want to. And I think being able to say no to certain things is a good thing.
So I don't want to denigrate any of the people that you do work with, because they're all very good customers. But if there was anybody you could work with, who would it be?
From people who haven't. That is a very good question. There are a few people who haven't worked with, which I would love to work with. One of them would definitely be Andre Ballas, the creator of the Chiltern Farmhouse, the Standard Hotel. I think he's a true innovator and a true, how can I put it? A person who really understands, at least from the output, although I've never met him, at least from the output he brings out, and people who really values and understands the power of design and creativity in creating really powerful and successful brands. And he strikes me as the kind of person that I would probably have a lot in common with. So he would be, definitely one we would, if he's listening, he should come and approach us.
Do you have a favourite place, favourite restaurant anywhere in the world, or even UK?
Yes, I do actually. My favourite restaurant is a very rough and ready Greek Cypriot restaurant around the corner from our studio here, called Chakos and Charcoal.
Okay.
Which has been around since the 70s.
I like that name, to be honest.
The name is
a great
brilliant.
name, isn't it?
The whole place is brilliant. It's literally a shack. It looks like it's closed. I shouldn't be really promoting it, because it's a bit under the radar, which is good news.
You're going to ruin it for everyone now, aren't you?
Yeah, although it's appeared lately in books of like Secret London, and people kind of know it. But you pass by, you think it's closed. There's hardly a kitchen. It's a few pieces of equipment thrown together. A very loose owner who wouldn't even have a menu up till a few years ago, would only take cash, only cook 5 things, all homemade by him. Great food, great conviviality. Conviviality is really important in hospitality. You know, a convivial place, a place where you can really have a great time, feel welcomed, feel looked after, without any frills, with just really good food, great ambience, put together.
Is the word conviviality Galosini? Is that what we say? It was
Galosini, yes, it is. Yeah, I guess that's the closest in Greek. Yes.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, there's something about the Greek hospitality. It's probably very similar to the Mediterranean hospitality, like the Italian and the Spanish.
Yes.
It's very heartwarming openings.
Yeah, and it's very it's not contrived. And I think this is the problem where other countries, not countries, but some cultures have this very non-contrived way of dealing with things, and that's why they excel in hospitality, because everything comes a bit naturally, and I think the Mediterraneans are good at that. And I think the bit that bugs me sometimes with restaurants or bars, especially conceptualized ones, is that everything sometimes becomes a bit robotic and prescribed, and you miss that kind of, how can I say, going freestyle. And Chakos and Charcoal, that's why it's one of my favorite places, because it's completely freestyle. Nothing is prescribed, nothing is organized. It's a bit chaotic, but somehow everything works, and you have a great time. Although the place looks like a mess, you know, everything is a complete mess. There's hardly electricity. Everything is falling apart, yet, you know, it's just a great place.
Strangely, you do find order in chaos.
Yes.
Yeah, you do. Like, whatever you say, I will probably feel more at home there, because we're used to it from home as such, or Cyprus or Greece. Like, no, everything's chaos there, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. But somehow it all comes together.
It does. It all does come together. All that screaming and shouting and rushing. But, you know, you do strike me as someone maybe that has probably succeeded in a way because of fear of failure, maybe, would you say? You know, your family's in Greece, you're over here on your own, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you feel there was a bit of that, like spurring you along?
Fear of failure. The fear of failure. Yes, absolutely. I thought you meant the lack of fear of failure. I was like, no. Yes, 100%. Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think, and that's why I think I get attracted by breaking rules and boundaries. It's the same thing as fear of failure is the thing that spurs me on, like a lot of people would tell you that I'm a real optimist, but actually I create the best when I feel that we're really failing in something, and that's what spurs me on in
that pressure.
Yeah, that pressure. I really enjoy being under that pressure, and that's why I like tight briefs, because I feel that pressure, and that's where I excel. And if you let me loose completely, I would probably not do very much. And I used to have a colleague, she worked with me for over 10 years. And once I said to her, I was a very lazy student. She was like, really, you? I can't imagine you being a lazy student. And I said to her, yeah, actually, I was a crappy and very lazy student. But I think that fear of failure, yes, really pushed me and made me do things and push myself.
It's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. You seem like you thrive in chaos.
Yeah.
Everyone else is panicking and rushing. We've got a deadline, and you're just sitting there going, "No,
I usually panic much earlier. That's what I do.
That's a fair point, actually. The starting, getting the motions going. Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Aphrodite, I just want to say thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
I've took up plenty of it. And we'll get back away now. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, and lovely to meet you over this.
It's been great. Thank
you.